review into PIP reports back. That's expected late next year. Disability Minister Stephen Timms confirmed the change in the House of Commons just a few moments ago.
We will move straight to the wider review, sometimes referred to as the Timms review, and only make changes to PIP eligibility, activities and descriptors following that review.
The Department for Culture, Media and Sport has written to the BBC's Director General over its coverage of Glastonbury. The corporation has said it regrets not pulling its live stream of a rap band as they made anti-Israeli military chants. Bob Villan earlier said they'd been targeted for speaking up after police started a criminal investigation. New figures from the Home Office show a record number of migrants have crossed the Channel in small boats during the first half of this year. Almost 20,000 people have made the journey. That's a 48% rise on this time last year. Donald Trump has visited a new detention centre in Florida's Everglades, which he's calling the alligator Alcatraz because it's surrounded by the reptiles. It's reported the facility costs $450 million and will be able to hold around 5,000 migrants. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 24 points at 87.85. The pound buys $1.37 and €1.16. LBC weather. There are showers in the north tonight, drier elsewhere with lows of 8 degrees, although it's feeling much muggier in the southeast. And the heat wave will finally break tomorrow with highs of 25 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Elizabeth Secker.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Well, in the words of the great Alex Ferguson, it's squeaky bum time for the government. In a little more than an hour, we will know whether its controversial welfare cuts have got through a key Commons vote or whether Keir Starmer has been defeated and plunged into a full-blown political crisis. Ministers who were, let's be clear, not panicking at all, announced a key new concession in just the last few minutes. Basically, they're doing a big review of personal independence payments, or PIPs, but making the changes before it reports. What we were talking about on this show yesterday is silly. And although Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State, was defending it in the Commons a couple of hours ago, they are dropping the silly idea. Best guess from old Marr that this rebellion will still be big, but not, I think, big enough to stop the bill. I think. I may still be wrong. MPs are still dithering right now, wondering which way to vote, or in some cases whether instead to lock themselves quietly in their offices and stare at their Instagram feeds of puppies and clog dancers and hope nobody notices. We're not at the stage of government resignations or anything like that, but it's possible that in about an hour and a half we will be. Meanwhile, I want to make an unpopular suggestion tonight. The real problem is we ourselves, the British public, because we both want to be caring and generous to people with a wide range of troubles, everything from multiple sclerosis to anxiety, but we also don't want to pay more taxes ourselves as Britain's disability bill rises and rises. The brutal truth is that the British economy is still not doing well enough to fund the welfare state and the lifestyles we have come to assume we deserve, whether we're working and paying our taxes or living on state handouts. So tonight's vote is not just about whether a government which is only a year old and really quite bad at politics is humiliated and knocked way off course. It's also the consequence of years, decades of economic and industrial decline, a country still going down, not up. None of that helps people deciding which way to vote. On that tonight, I have decided to go for one of the most eloquent and famous wheelchair users in the country, Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson, 11-time Paralympic medalist, gold medalist and crossbench peer. She gets PIP, or personal independence payments, herself and told me about her experience of receiving them.
So I get personal independence payment, like many disabled people, and I receive it because of the additional cost of living as a disabled person, because society is still inaccessible. So it's to pay for things like additional transport, having to wash your clothes more often, just living different. I mean, basically because society is still inaccessible. And I know, there's a lot of agonised MPs at the moment trying to figure out what to do. I've had more calls from MPs than I've ever had asking me what I would do if I were in their shoes.
And what would you do if you were in their shoes tonight? Because you're right, they are really agonising. They don't know what to do.
It's really difficult because I know there's pressure being put on Labour MPs about it being, the first anniversary and it's not a good look. I think most people I've spoken to, actually on all sides, are saying this feels very rushed. I'm in a really privileged position as a crossbencher. I don't have to listen to anyone tell me how to vote. So, I would be voting against it, not because I don't think reform is required. Absolutely, reform is required. It is not sustainable for the system to carry on existing in the way it is. But just slashing benefits, the impact assessment says it could push 150,000 people into deeper poverty, which just then puts the bill in another budget line. So it doesn't actually save the country money. If we're serious about trying to save the country money, then we have to do things in a different way. And I guess my biggest frustration is just some of the misinformation where we've heard, ministers say it's an out-work benefit and it's not an in-work benefit. It's a qualifying benefit. It doesn't matter whether you're in work or not. You get it if you hit the criteria. The criteria does need to be looked at. And I think, when you've got 1 million young people that are in this system, it means we haven't got other things right. I think, DWP's own figures say fraud rate is very low, but I do think it's expanded and expanded. And I think we need to be looking at a different way of supporting people.
And what is your own feeling about one system or one benefit, as it were, being used by wheelchair users or people with really serious back problems, physical problems on the one hand, and it's also the same benefit which a lot of people, often younger people, are applying to because they've got anxiety or stress or depression or whatever?
Yeah, I don't think the evaluation system necessarily is flexible to work with that. And I said, the last time we substantively did welfare reform was back in 2012 in Parliament. And I said at the time, and I think the Minister, Lord Freud, thought I was taking the mick slightly, and I genuinely wasn't, but saying you need to actually employ disabled people to do some of these assessments because actually they understand that lived experience and they're able to look and make an assessment. So the assessment process is not working because a number of people who were rejected, it then goes to mandatory reconsideration, which there's a cost to it. Then goes to a tribunal, which there's a cost. Something like 70% are then awarded it a tribunal, which means that the whole system's wrong. So I think the whole system is wrong. So what we're seeing in the Commons is a bit of a slash and burn. And actually, the concessions, I don't think they're real concessions. They're just sort of kicking the can down the road a bit. And it'll be interesting to see what amendments are selected and what gets voted on. I do think it's a really difficult position for MPs to be in.
Would it be a fair assessment of your view to say that you think they should vote against it now, but the government should pull it and come back with a bigger, more thought through, more possibly even more radical reform?
Yeah, and do something which is more holistic, which is looking at genuine reform, which is not just slashing benefits. Because if it pushes more people into a different budget line, that's not actually helping anything. Disabled people should be working. They should be paying taxes, but there need to be decent jobs. You need to be able to get on public transport to get to those jobs. So none of this legislation exists in isolation. Yeah. And there's just lots of stuff that just doesn't feel like it's working at the moment. And
Tanny, you said slash and burn a moment ago. Do you think the motivations behind this are wrong? In other words, it's about saving money.
I think every government does it to save money because you look at the welfare bill and I think it worries people, when you're trying to balance the books of, UK PLC. So, we hear a lot about, it's to help the most vulnerable. We heard it in the coalition. We hear it all. Ultimately, every reform like this ends up being to save money. And, they just need to be honest about it. This is not going to save money. It's just going to put the money in different budget lines. Final question. You're a crossbencher in the House of Lords. You don't take a party whip. But this bill is coming very soon to the House of Lords. Given what a hard time it's had in the Commons, it's not going to pass the Lords unscathed, is it? No, it's not. And I think, our job is to amend. It's to look at stuff line by line. We've got people with, deep personal and professional experience of the benefit system. So it won't come out of the laws unscathed. My preference would be do something better. And just be a bit more thoughtful about what the end is. I think we can get a better system, but I'm not entirely sure this is the way to do it.
Tanni Gray-Thompson, Lady Gray-Thompson, somebody with more gold medals than many averagely sized countries. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, listening to that was Baroness Sally Morgan, Labour peer and former senior advisor to Tony Blair between 1997 and 2005. Sally, this must bring back some memories, because people forget that the first Blair administration had some very, very difficult votes as well.
We did. But these things are always difficult. But listening to Tanni, actually, we may end up voting differently. But I have a great deal of sympathy with what she was saying, because I think there is an absolute imperative that we have a serious reform of the welfare system. My take generally is that you start with the principles of what you're trying to do, and actually the British public on the whole are pretty fair-minded. They think we should treat people properly, and they don't want to lump everybody together. And there's a difference between people who are disabled and really need a lot of support, and people who perhaps need different sorts of support but actually need to be at work. Particularly, I think, younger people. I'm very worried about the numbers.
So that point, one single benefit covers somebody who's relatively young, says I've got stress, I've got anxiety, or somebody who is seriously disabled and a wheelchair user.
Yes.
And if we had a kind of national conversation about this over the last 3 months, and ministers had been more open and expressing the principles, we might not have been where we are today.
I think it's more than 3 months, actually. I think, arguably it would have been good if it had been part of the general election campaign. In a sense, you've got to build support across the country for changes in welfare, because there's always people who feel very, very strongly and want to defend the current system. That's inevitable. But we need to decide what it is as a country we want to support. Nobody really thinks it's sensible to have sort of exponential growth of people receiving benefits. And why are we still different than most other countries post-COVID? So there's all sorts of obvious starting points of let us look at this properly, but then you have got to do it calmly and rationally, I think, and say, so therefore, how do we make this system work better and not cost too much?
Let's turn a little bit to the politics of this, because we would not have had this very last minute concession if the government whips had been telling Keir Starmer, you're going to win this.
Yeah. Look, I think that's probably true. I mean, I don't know how close it was, but presumably too close for comfort. And last-minute changes are always awkward for all sorts of reasons. You've sent people out on the media. You will have had people here, I'm sure, who now will look back and think, well, heavens, I was defending this and I wasn't even that sure about it, but I was defending it, or in the Commons, or ministers.
You say people. I mean, Liz Kendall herself was defending a position which the government has now backed away from only a couple of hours ago.
Well, because that was not a rational position. You can't say... I mean, I'm not sure the review is necessarily the right thing to do in the way it's being done, because I think it's a bit desperate. I think it needs to be something much broader than the way they're trying to do it. However, if you're going to do a review, you've got to look at what comes out of it. You can't sort of put the changes in and then do a review. It doesn't make any sense. So I think it was irrational.
We have been covering this story for some time now, days and days and days. One thing that's been very, very clear is that backbenchers simply felt ignored, not listened to, pushed aside, brushed aside. What do you think has gone wrong in the operation? Why did this government get into this mess?
Look, I think it must have been incredibly difficult for the last however long, 6 months more. The level of international crisis, if you like, must be absorbing a lot of the hours of care in particular. It must be extremely difficult. But there's no shortcuts on politics. It's not about crises, it's about building relationships over a long time, I think, and putting proper time in. You
can't be a successful Prime Minister abroad if you don't have a very solid majority at home. And
a meaningful majority, actually. You can have, it's got a very meaningful majority, but I think both colleagues around the cabinet table, colleagues throughout the government, but the whole political operation, if you like, more broadly, has to be focused on having good communication with the PLP. It doesn't mean as part of their job. It doesn't mean you just sort of say, oh, right, well, we'll definitely do that because we've heard what you say. But you cannot over-explain. You can't over-explain, and you have to respect where people are coming from, and then in the majority of cases, you can probably persuade them that possibly they should move somewhere different, but they need to understand what the arguments are.
So if I was Keir Starmer or Morgan McSweeney or any of the top team, your advice would be spend more time in the House of Commons listening to people, talking with people. I mean, it's a two-way thing. It's not just tell us what you think. It's actually genuinely two-way, but it's proper communication, and it has to be way beyond Keir and Morgan and it is essentially about saying anybody working around the government, this is part of your job. We're all in this. We've all got to take part in it. Now, at the moment, we both think the government is going to win this vote in the end. But if they don't, if this actually falls, how serious would that be for the government?
Of course it would be serious. I mean, I think that they will get through. But we'll both hang our hats on it, Andy. I think they will get through. Of course, it's serious. You never want to lose significant votes, but it's not a confidence vote, because in a sense they've already made concessions, which mean that in a way they've moved away from the position they were in. So for me, it's much more, regardless of the way the vote goes, learn the lessons. Actually, think about why it's ended up in this position and run things a bit differently.
Not fatal, but messy.
Messy.
Sally Morgan, Baroness Morgan, thank you very, very much indeed for coming in. So why, after these concessions from the government, are many Labour MPs apparently still holding out? Murray Rimmer is one of them. She was a former disability spokesman back in the Corbyn years, and she is planning to vote against the government's bill. And after listening to the debate in the Commons all day, had she heard anything asked her that could change her mind?
No, nothing at all. I considered very carefully last night after I spoke to my whip, and I considered very carefully. It's not an easy thing to do, to go against your whip, but this is a matter of conscience for me. I cannot walk away and leave this. So many of my constituents are involved, and hundreds of thousands of people disabled, and they stand to suffer.
I think a lot of people listening to this might assume that PIPs, or personal independence payments, is quite a small number of people around the country, but in your constituency it's a very, very high proportion. Is that right?
It is a high proportion, and PIP allows people to go to work. It helps people to go to work. It's not an out-of-work benefit. It helps people to get there, transport. It augments the lack of social care or nursing, health care. It enables people to work. And if they should lose that PIP, it just destroys that, and more people could be out of work that way. It's about helping people to live a life and with independence, and not to be holding a begging bowl out all the time. It gives them dignity, allows them to get their own way in life.
So there's a vote coming up a little bit later on this evening. Are you absolutely clear that you're going to vote against the government?
I'm absolutely clear, and it is not an easy thing to say. I've been a member of the Labour Party well over 50 years. I hold it very dear. I think it's the only way there is to a fair and equality system for us all. It's not an easy decision for me to make, but I have made that decision now, and I'm quite clear. My conscience is clear on doing that.
Even though, if this bill fails tonight, Keir Starmer's own position as Prime Minister will be under question.
I don't know, as it will. Yes, I suppose some people would say that. I'm not voting this way with any consideration on Keir's position as Prime Minister or not Prime Minister. I think we've inherited one hell of a lot, and we've done a hell of a lot in these terms, and Keir Starmer has played his role in that. And there's no doubt, when he was first elected, I said he was manna from heaven. It was just what we needed at that time. So it is not personal against Keir Starmer. It is this bill for me.
So it's gone from manna to heaven to a bitter taste.
Not a bitter taste. Life has moved on, and there's been so much, quite frankly, what he has put up with and what he's inherited, and what's come since, war across the world, more or less.
One final point, Marie. A lot of people will say that the trouble is this bill, this welfare bill, is running out of control. It'll be £60 billion a year by the end of this Parliament, and we as a country simply can't afford it. We have to restrain somehow the welfare bill. What would you do if you were them?
Well, I don't think I'm not saying it isn't an expensive lot, but quite frankly, people are people, and we have a welfare system, and these people should live in dignity. and should not feel that they are a burden, and we should make it a high priority. And it's a matter of choice where we spend our money and where we collect it from. And this money could have been collected. I'm not saying that there are not changes. There's some wonderful things in there, like helping people, supporting them to get into employment. I'm not against this bill completely or anything like that, but it's about people, individuals. They're all individuals.
And have you had a huge number of individuals contacting you directly from the constituencies of their MP?
Absolutely. Even this morning, I just go in, I have it on my phone, I have it on my iPad everywhere, and the emails that's coming in constantly saying, please vote against this, telling the stories. If you've listened to the debate, to listen to some of our colleagues across the floor talk about their constituents coming to them, heartbreaking. People just want dignity and some assistance, but with dignity, not to be humiliated and considered a burden.
Well, a very, very important vote later on, Mary. Thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to us.
Thank you.
Well, up next, a huge development in the case of the convicted killer Lucy Letby, as 3 bosses from the hospital she worked at are arrested. We'll get all the latest on that in a few minutes, but the time now, 6:21.
This is LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:23. A big development in the Lucy Letby story, though quite what it means, it's hard to say. 3 senior members of the leadership team at the County of Chester Hospital, where the neonatal nurse worked, have been arrested for gross negligence manslaughter. That's part of an investigation into her conviction. I'm joined now by our North West reporter, Liam Gotting, who can give us the latest. Liam.
Well, Andrew, the first thing we should mention is that Cheshire Police today were very quick to reiterate that these arrests do not in any way impact on the convictions of Lucy Letby, who was sentenced to 15 whole life orders for murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder 7 others. But after that long trial, Cheshire Police decided to continue looking into the Countess of Chester Hospital, focusing on senior leadership and their decision-making to the increased levels of baby deaths that the hospital was seeing at the time. And that investigation has now led to these arrests. 3 people who were part of the senior leadership team at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2015 and 2016 were told were arrested yesterday on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. Now, a statement from Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes from Cheshire Police says that this is a separate offence to corporate manslaughter and focuses on the grossly negligent action or inaction of individuals. He goes on to say that this is not the end of the investigation and that there is no set timescale for this investigation to end. Now, Andrew, we know that the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which investigates potential miscarriages of justice, is considering evidence presented on Lucy Letby's behalf from an international panel of medics who claim poor medical care and natural causes were the reasons for the baby's collapsing. And the former Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has recently called for Lucy Letby's convictions to be re-examined in what is perhaps the biggest intervention in the child murder case so far. But for now, Andrew, these three former senior leaders at the Countess of Chester Hospital have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. All three have been bailed pending further investigation.
Liam, thank you very much indeed for that. Yesterday, we were talking about the collapse in Britain's birth rate, that we're not having enough babies and how serious that is. One part of the answer might be getting better parental leave and pay. Campaigners have long said the Britain's system is far too mean and doesn't work for young families, and the government is now promising a review of the whole system for supporting new parents to take time off work, including shared maternity and paternity leave. Let's talk now to Justine Roberts of Mumsnet. Was she disappointed that this move is just a review and not immediate further action?
Well, I'm glad they're having a review because it's a bit of a broken, failed system. The uptake of parental leave is almost nothing. Fathers are still getting very little paternity pay and lots of them are not even taking any paternity leave. So the whole system does need a thorough review, and it's something we've been calling for some time. So I'd love it if tomorrow they announced that they were going to do 6 weeks paternity pay at 90%. But I do accept the fact that I think they need to work out how to deliver this so it's taken up. But what I'm scared of is they're just kicking it down the road, and at the end of it, there'll be no new money. And in the end, we do need new money.
You mentioned 6 weeks and 90% of salary. How does Britain compare to other European countries in what we give people when they've got new children?
I think we're sort of not that out of kilter with sort of Western European countries, but as ever, it's the Scandi countries that are doing this brilliantly, and this isn't just about wouldn't it be nice if dads had some time off? All the evidence actually shows that the longer the father spends with their newborn baby, the more involved they are throughout the child's life. So it has a knock-on effect on both the parenting of that child, but also on the gender pay gap and things like that, because there's a much more equal division of labour in the household when men are more involved in it with their kids. And we know from all our polling on Mumsnet that we're still far from an equal division of labour, I'm afraid, around the household and around the domestic responsibility. And that's one of the reasons why women, why we end up having a gender pay gap, because women have so many more responsibilities that they're taking on all the caring of parents and children that they can't progress their careers. So there's an equality issue here, there's a child welfare issue, and there's just simply a fairness on dads who may want to spend more time with their kids.
Absolutely. Some people use the phrase toxic masculinity about the involvement of fathers with children. And we were talking on the programme yesterday about our falling birth rate in the UK. It's down to 1.44 or something, very, very low. Do you think this is part of the reason why?
I do think economics are part of the reason why people think a little bit more carefully about having children. Clearly having children is an expensive thing to do, and I think people are delaying it until they can, for instance, sort their housing out, and we know how expensive it is to get on the housing system. So yes, I do think if we want to encourage more children, which I think we do because we've got an ageing population, then one thing we could look at is better paternity and parental leave.
If I was an employer, I've been given all sorts of new workers' rights things to deal with. I've got national insurance to deal with. I might say to you, that's all very well, Justine, but, that's yet another burden on me. What would you say to employers who are against this? Because we have in this country a very, very strong employers' lobby.
I think that's fair enough, and obviously I'm an employer too. It's interesting, in this review the government have said that they won't they are mindful of putting extra burdens on business. I think there are some businesses that can cope very well, larger businesses with people's parental leave, and smaller businesses struggle more. So I think it's important that the government makes a distinction in what they're asking big employers and small employers to do. But ultimately, I think, just say we did go to 6 weeks paid paternity leave for fathers and they took it. I think most businesses could cope with that, except the very small ones. And at the moment, even though fathers get 2 weeks statutory paternity leave, only about a third of them are taking it. And I think we've got the balance wrong. That is not good for families and it's not good for children.
And how much would getting this right, as it were, produce not just, as it were, a happier country, but less crime, less vandalism, and perhaps young boys doing better at school?
Well, I can't give you an answer to that, but I think it's the right question. I think, we all know that absentee fathers are a large factor in, if we don't have the role models, if we don't have fathers involved with their sons, then it will have a knock-on effect. And I think there are other things. There are other things that can be done in this review. It's not just about more money. For instance, a lot of big companies don't publish their parental leave policies, and women in particular are afraid to ask an interview in case that affects their job prospects. And we could easily compel larger companies to publish their parental leave policies. At the moment, more publish their policies on pets than they do their policies on parental leave, and that's just ridiculous. So we could just make that part of the gender pay gap reporting. It's something at Mumsnet we've been campaigning on for a while now. It's an easy, cost-free change that would make a big difference to people.
Well, ministers are always asking for cost-free suggestions, and I'm sure they'll have heard that one. Justine Roberts, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next, you may have thought that the feud between President Trump and Elon Musk was dying down. If so, think again. Our Washington correspondent will be here with all the gory details. But first, the time is 6:32 and Elizabeth Secker has your news headlines.
The government has offered a further concession to Labour rebels ahead of a crucial vote on its welfare reform bill tonight. MPs have been told changes to the personal independence payment will now not take place until after a review next year. Voting on the bill will begin shortly. The Culture, Media and Sport Committee has written to the BBC seeking answers over what went wrong during its coverage of Glastonbury Festival. The corporation has already said mistakes were made when it failed to pull the live broadcast of a rap band who led the crowd in anti-Israel chants. It's officially the hottest day of the year so far, with a temperature of 34.7 recorded in St James's Park in central London. The Met Office has also revealed England has had its warmest June on record. LBC weather staying warm and muggy in the southeast tonight. There's showers in the north with lows of 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
Over.
This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:35. One criticism made of Keir Starmer is that he is not vivid enough. He doesn't ram home his politics in a way that sticks in people's imaginations. Now, that could not be said of Donald Trump, who is pushing his programme for the mass deportation of migrants in America by hailing the opening of the so-called alligator Alcatraz in Florida. This is a pretty astonishing story, and I am delighted that LBC's Washington man Simon Marks is here to tell us about it. So this is a former airfield in the middle of the Everglades, they're called?
Correct.
In Florida, surrounded by alligators, snakes, poisonous spiders. And President Trump is delighted.
Absolutely delighted. You know, Andrew, of course, that he has a plan anyway to reopen the real Alcatraz, that iconic island prison in San Francisco Bay. He absolutely covets the idea of being seen to be taking dramatic action that is tough on crime, adding to his kind of tough guy image. And in this case, he's embracing a 5,000-bed facility that has been built from nothing in the last 3 weeks in the Florida wetlands. This was all an initiative by the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, formerly one of Donald Trump's rivals in the Republican Party. And basically the White House says there's only one road into this facility, and the only way out of it is on a flight taking you one way back to the country that you came from if you're one of the migrants that Donald Trump plans to deport. The White House is confident that any escapee from this facility will fall victim to the alligators, the pythons, the rattlesnakes, the deadly spiders that inhabit the wetlands that surround its perimeter. So there's this whole sort of almost Dr. Evil feel. I mean, a real
It's
James Bond villain's lair
about
stuff.
Performative, aggressive
Absolutely.
politics is absolutely extraordinary. And speaking again of performative politics, there's a new episode in the wonderful long-running Trump versus Elon Musk fight. You know, they were best buddies, and now they are at war, partly over this so-called big, beautiful bill. And Elon Musk has been going at Donald Trump. Let's just hear what Donald Trump's been saying back today.
I don't know. I mean, we'll have to take a look. We might have to put Doge on Elon. You know what Doge is? Doge is the monster that might have to go back and eat Elon. Wouldn't that be terrible?
So not an alligator, but another monster that's going to eat Elon if he's not deported.
Yes, I mean, it's the prospect that Donald Trump is threatening there of turning the Department of Government Efficiency, which, of course, Elon Musk created and used to run, and we should always say it is not, by the way, a real American government department, turning that department onto a review of all the federal government contracts held by Elon Musk's business. And this is Donald Trump saying things like Starlink, SpaceX, and all the other Musk-owned companies will not stand up to very much scrutiny if those federal contracts are reviewed, which is a way of Trump getting his own back for Musk's continuing and increasingly vocal, once again, opposition to the big, beautiful tax and spending bill.
It's like a mafia film where the families go to war on each other. I mean, again, I've got a quote here from Trump. Elon may get more subsidy than any human being in history, by far. And without subsidies, Elon would probably have to close up shop and head back to South Africa. But Elon Musk has been going for this so-called big, beautiful bill, which he thinks is just raising spending. It's just got through the Senate, hasn't it, by one vote?
J.D. Vance, in his capacity as President of the Senate, the Vice President of the country, cast the deciding vote because they were looking at a 50-50 tie. 3 Republicans voted against Donald Trump on this legislation. And so as a result of that, this is now through. It goes back to the House of Representatives, where continuing negotiations will take place with the White House. There is a Republican pushback against some of the elements of this spending bill. And it is vast, this bill, Andrew. It's going to add $5 trillion to the American deficit. It's going to take more than 10 million people off health insurance. It's going to shred the provision of food stamps and other nutritional assistance for an estimated 4 million Americans. Tax cuts, of course, for the wealthy. It's a massive hostage to fortune if this thing finally gets through for Donald Trump. He thinks it's the pillar of the hallmark of his domestic policy legislation. But the implications of this, if the Democrats are right, are that it's going to be the biggest job killer the economy has seen.
It's a gigantic gamble, and we know that Elon Musk absolutely hates it. And again, reading what he's been saying recently or posting on social media, he said that any Congress members who vote for this big, beautiful bill should hang their heads in shame, and they will lose their primaries next year if it is the last thing I do on earth. And he's now saying that this is an example of what the old Washington, the old corruption, what he calls the Porky Pie Party, and he's threatening to create a new American party called the America Party.
The America Party, which he has argued he would position right in the centre to pull support away from disaffected Republicans and disaffected Democrats. And looking at the political playing field in the United States today, there are plenty of people who fall into that category. Whether they would be attracted by a political party founded by Elon Musk and funded by him is another matter. But it does underscore the fact that he remains the richest man in the world. He's sitting on a monumental fortune that he could use in a pretty devastating way politically, even as Donald Trump hints at the possibility of getting him out of the country back to South Africa. Steve Bannon has said that the Department of Justice should launch an investigation into how Elon Musk first came to be in the United States, suggesting that perhaps deportation may ultimately be the order of the day. This is going to get increasingly ugly.
It is a feral world, and it's not just the alligators we're talking about.
Exactly.
Simon Marks, thank you very much indeed. Now, I have discovered something today. One way to find out about interesting stories is to go into the House of Commons and sit there and listen. Remarkable. This is Joe Powell, the Labour MP for Kensington and Bayswater, during Treasury questions earlier this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister's no doubt aware, an increasingly common issue on our high streets is phoenixing, where a shop unit continues to trade while cycling through multiple limited companies every few months, none of which pay corporation tax, VAT or business rates. So can the Minister encourage HMRC officials to walk along Whitehall, just a few hundred metres from this chamber, and take a look at whether the series of Harry Potter themed gift shops across London, accused by London Centric of doing exactly that, are playing by the rules and ensure that tax enforcement supports legitimate small businesses on our high street?
Isn't that interesting? Phoenixing. The organisation, which has been doing very good digging on this particular story, he referred to it just now, is Jim Waterston's website, London Centric, and Jim joins me now. Now, I don't want to kind of point the finger too much at individual shops. We don't know what's going on. But this is, you have discovered, a real problem, certainly in central London.
Yeah, I mean, the book was Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, but this is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix and Company. This is what happens when you've got these shops that are trading. And what we found when we've dug into them, people go, well, what's going on here? How have these things popped up? And you find out that behind that shop front that never changes, selling tourist tat to lots of people going in and spending good money, are a constantly cycling chain of companies, all owned by people who seemingly have no retail experience, never filing accounts, never paying corporation tax, and never seemingly paying their business rates. And the weird thing with this is nothing really changes on the street front as you pass it by, but behind the scenes, it looks like British taxpayers are missing out.
And it's not just these shops, all these famous American sweet candy stores you see all over the place. They're similar, are they?
A very, very similar thing. So basically every few months, the company that behind the scenes, the company that's actually cashing the credit card balances, that's taking the payments in, that just mysteriously is replaced by another one. If you're in the shop, you wouldn't know anything different from month to month. But when you go back in, if you paid, you'd find it was going to a different person. And this is one of the big challenges for HMRC at the moment. The legitimate businesses, the places that are paying their corporation tax, the places that are paying their business rates to local councils that frankly don't have a lot of money, they're going, we're losing 30-40% compared to these guys. You know, we can't compete with people who aren't paying their taxes. And that is a real challenge. And so Joe raising that in the House of Commons at Treasury Questions is really important, because if you can start to actually stop this money being lost, you can actually start to have some of those public services back that we really want.
And you focus on London, obviously. It's called London-centric. But do you think this is going on in other parts of the country as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just on the Harry Potter shops that I've been investigating, and they've got strong links in Oxford and also in Cambridge. Almost anywhere with a load of American tourists is going to be a place where you can sell a Slytherin jumper for a lot of money. But yeah, it's nationwide, and people will see a lot of candy shops and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that they are all up to no good. A lot of these people are legitimate businesses trying to do the right thing, and they're the most annoyed people in all of this, because I've talked to some of those and they go, we just can't compete, and why on earth can we not get HMRC to take this seriously? And I think the idea is that HMRC are looking at the big guys, and actually some of the worst tax evasion is on the real ground floor.
It's slightly mysterious, isn't it, what HMRC gets up to? Because you would think simply walking along the street, knocking on the door, going in and asking some questions would be all they would need to do.
I mean, one of the shops that I've raised questions about in central London is literally about 200 metres from the headquarters of HMRC. So I think if the chief exec wanted to wander along the street and have a look, he could probably do it on his lunch break.
Absolutely astonishing. Well, as ever, some great work from London Centric. Jim, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. And do check out Jim's website, London Centric, as well, for lots more fascinating investigations and journalism. We are going to return to our top story next as the high-stakes vote on the government's welfare bill gets very close indeed. Our top political team will be with me in the studio, but the time now, 6:45.
Coming up at 7, Ian Dale leading Britain's conversation. Next on LBC. Seconds. Tonight with Andrew Marr on LBC.
6:47, and we are getting ever closer to that nail-biting vote of the government's welfare reform. A vote that has prompted a U-turn from number 10 at the end of last week and concessions from ministers throughout today. Here to give us the state of play with minutes to go until MPs start to vote, I'm joined by our political editor, Natasha Clark. I shouldn't be too proprietorial. And our
I am your
political
political editor, Andrew.
Aggie Shornbury, welcome to you both. Natasha, let's just start with you. I don't know if you had a chance to speak to MPs since Stephen Timms gave that concession after concession after concession, final concession, and I wonder whether it's changed minds.
I think it has, Andrew, although I'll be honest, listening to some MPs in the chamber just now, MP after MP is now saying, what's the point in voting on this at all? The government should just pull the whole thing. And it's because, Andrew, the concession that Stephen Timms announced at the dispatch box just around an hour or so ago, an hour and a half ago now, was basically that they were going to scrap the entire of Clause 5. That's all of the PIP changes. So really it begs the question, well, what is actually left in this bill? There's not a lot there. And MPs are just going, look, we really do need to just pull this now, take a step back, start the Timms review now and really start listening to those people who are so worried about it. But the government at the moment showing no signs of doing that. They obviously want to get a vote on the principle of welfare reform and they need to do it tonight. Otherwise, Keir Starmer's authority is completely shot.
Absolutely. Now, I was going to say I don't want to rub salt in the wound, but actually I do want to rub salt in the wound because, Natasha, the concession that we've had from Stephen Timms, I was asking him about on this programme yesterday, saying it didn't make any sense to me at all. And yet he defended it then. And then we had Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State, in the chamber, about 2.5 hours ago, saying that they weren't going to move, and behind the scenes they were already moving. It makes people like her, and indeed the Minister himself, look pretty foolish.
Indeed it does, and actually speaking to people through the afternoon, no one seemed to know what was going on. There was this massively febrile atmosphere, the rumours swirling, Liz Kendall at the dispatch box saying one thing, MPs in the House of Commons saying other things, and people basically saying, look, the government hasn't completely agreed to this concession. So there were these couple of hours where everyone kind of knew it was happening, but it hadn't happened. And now, as Natasha says, I mean, the good news, rare good news for the government is, as someone just said to me, a rebel, there's nothing left to vote against. So the bill has been so, in their words, gutted by the concessions that actually now it will go through, but what's actually in it? And questions already, even before this vote has actually been put to a vote, even before it's passed, as now we expect it will, people are starting to say, well, what happens now? And one leading rebel has just sent me a message saying this all comes back to the number 10 operation. I know we've talked about this in the last few days and weeks, Andrew, but questions again from this leading rebel about the Chief of Staff in number 10, Morgan McSweeney, and saying, you know, heads have to roll after this because this comes back to the number 10 operation. And I think there is just anger. Another person saying we've been left with a total Frankenstein bill at the end of all this. They should have listened sooner.
Well, at least Frankenstein could get up and walk, as I recall. I mean, Natasha, let's talk about the likely outcome of this, or the likely implications politically. Keir Starmer made it very, very clear in Cabinet today he wasn't going to get rid of Morgan McSweeney, and he hated people briefing against him. But it is number 10 who are responsible for this corporately. I mean, they were the people who were failing to have the conversations with so many Labour MPs who were so angry that we got into this mess.
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. And I was really struck when I talked to him at the NATO summit while all of this rebellion was bubbling around back home, and he just did not want to engage with it at all. And I don't know whether that's the fault of himself or that's the fault of somebody around him in number 10 who didn't just, wasn't able to say, look, Prime Minister, back home, you've got 120 of your own MPs who have signed this amendment. This isn't going to go through. What are we going to do about it? And he spoke in some of those interviews he did over the weekend about how, how regretful he was a little bit about that, and how basically he was focused on the NATO summit, the G7, Iran, of course, and also the firebombing of his sister's home as well, legitimate concerns. But when you're Prime Minister, you have to be able to manage this. And either someone around Keir Starmer wasn't telling him really what was going on, or he was deciding, actually, I'm going to park this and I'm going to deal with it later. They should have woken up to the music on this far sooner. So I think there is upset at the heart of number 10 about this, how this whole thing has been handled. But even today, I mean, today the government have been very careful not to rule out further concessions, and obviously we've just seen them happen. This would not have happened 90 minutes before the bill if the government did not think they were going to lose this bill and lose this vote tonight. They have taken a last-minute decision. They've embarrassed Liz Kendall. They've given the Chancellor another £5 billion to find now before the budget, because if you scrap all of these PIP changes, that just means that she's going to have to find even more money. And you've basically kicked the can down the road for another fight later on with this Timms review. So all of these Labour MPs are going to have this fight all over again with number 10 within the next year and a half, and it's going to cause another headache later down the line. This is a flagship Labour bill. Keir Starmer can't get it through. He can't, tackle these very, very big issues of welfare. And this is meant to be the week where he's celebrating his first year in power, and we are talking about the chaos at the heart of number 10.
Word Horlicks comes to mind. But before we finish this conversation, I think we should just try to dip back into the House of Commons right now, because this is the final stage of what has been a very, very frenetic debate. Let's hear Stephen Timms.
My honourable friend, the member for Southampton Itchin, a key step in this bill is the first ever permanent real terms increase in the standard allowance of universal credit. Actually, it's the first permanent real terms increase in the headline rate of benefit for decades. And the Tory party, of course, is against it. They froze benefits time and again. They created these work disincentives and mass dependence on food banks, which this government is determined now to address. And we are, of course, concerned as well that the future cost increases of personal independence payment should be sustainable. And let me just look back on the record of that. PIP cost the then government in the year before the pandemic, 2019-20, at today's prices, £12 billion. Last year, it cost £22 billion.
And what I can see from here is Liz Kendall sitting beside Stephen Timms, looking absolutely dejected and really depressed. And there was cutaways to some faces of Labour backbenchers there, looking very, very unimpressed as well. We still don't know whether this is going to cut through. It is absolutely on the edge, I think, still, Aggie. All day I've been thinking they're going to get it through easily. No, they're not. It's really on the edge. Oh, maybe they are going to get it through. Maybe they're not. It's been the hardest vote to call that I have ever known.
I've been doing exactly the same thing. I felt like if you'd asked me last Thursday, I was convinced this is absolutely, categorically not going through. And then there were concessions. And then I thought, OK, well, of course it's going to go through now. And then I started listening to what people were saying yesterday. And I thought, oh, my goodness, this might not go through. And I'm speaking to people who could not believe that Number 10 were in a position where they had given away expensive concessions and had not got promises from the rebels that they were going to get this through.
And the trouble is, the more you dribble these concessions out bit by bit by bit, the more you say, I'm not putting the bill, but here's more concessions. It suggests that your kind of intellectual position is completely crumbling and that therefore the thinking behind the bill has gone, in which case, why support it?
Indeed, and it also shows that if you are a Labour backbencher and you're extremely unhappy, if you throw your, I don't want to diminish what they are saying, but if you are very angry publicly, you might be able to change minds. And also there's been this really interesting thing that it feels like there's been sort of currents. So it feels like if you speak to people and they're speaking to other people and they think, OK, I've got enough people, and the tide is turning within the MPs really, really quickly, and people are changing their minds really quickly. And even today, I thought it was so striking that there were some Labour MPs who genuinely did not know how they were going to vote on this.
I've met similar people all day. Let's just kick back at the end and think about what this might mean in wider terms. So whether or not this particular votes go through after all these concessions, this suggests to a lot of people that this is no longer a government which can make big, difficult, painful public sector reforms. And the markets are going to look at this, Natasha, and think, well, they're not actually a government that can control public spending, in which case we're all going to pay a higher price in terms of borrowing.
Yeah, and actually, just before we cut through to Stephen Timms just there in the Commons, he told MPs that this review that he's about to undertake of personal independence payments is, quote, not designed to save money. And obviously that's completely crazy because the government have been saying for so long that we need to control this in a bid to stop the welfare bill from getting out of control. So apart from reforming of the system to make it work, which is the other argument that ministers have been saying, what else is the point if it's not going to save the Chancellor some money at the end of the day? And you're right, the markets are going to look at this, I think, with a bit of a pinch of, what's going to happen next? Rachel Reeves is going to be in a total bind, as we've just said. But also, like I say, what does this say about Keir Starmer's authority? As Aggie said, what does this say about Labour MPs that want more from the government? The two-child benefit cap, we know, is still something that MPs want to see. What will be the next thing now for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour MPs to try to pressure him on next?
I think the absolutely crucial word you used there was authority, because this is really, Aggie, it's about belief, isn't it? It's about somebody being in charge and people knowing that he's in charge. And this has been a day of absolute mayhem.
Absolutely. And also, as somebody just said to me, one of the rebels has just said to me, people are blaming Morgan McSweeney. Before that, people blamed Sue Gray. People often blame the Chancellor. And somebody said, at some stage, people are just going to start blaming Keir Starmer because there will be nobody left. And it is extraordinary that people are starting to say that within a year. We are just within a year of his first leadership. And it is extraordinary that it has been this chaotic this quickly.
Let's hope it's not too late to learn some really serious lessons from all of this. But Aggie and Natasha, thank you both very, very much for now. And the vote is going to be taking place very soon indeed. I'm delighted that Aggie and Natasha are both sticking around to follow the result with my colleague Ian Dale throughout the evening. Go nowhere else, stay with us. While we await the results of the welfare vote, they've delayed the changes further with a last-minute concession on PIP payments. And earlier I spoke to one of the rebelling MPs, Mari Rimmer, about why she is voting against the government and what is at stake in the Commons this evening.
If you've listened to the debate, to listen to some of our colleagues across the floor talk about their constituents coming from heartbreaking, people just want dignity and some assistance, but with dignity.
with dignity. I will be back with you tomorrow. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on the top stories and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you want, pause, rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. The debate is now over. MPs are about to traipse through the voting lobbies to decide whether the welfare reform bill will get its second reading. It's been a rancid debate in many ways and a pretty unedifying week in the run-up to it, with the government flailing around trying to get the rebels back on side. We'll find out in the next half an hour if they've been successful. I don't expect a defeat, and surely with a majority of 170, it can't happen. But MPs are strange beasts, aren't they? We'll bring all the drama to you live. On Cross Question 8, we have columnist Yasmin Alibi Brown, Labour MP Rosie Writing, Conservative MP Greg Smith and the